Welcome to another in our Lexington Remembers series. This series is sponsored by the Lexington Council on Aging and Friends of the Lexington Council on Aging. Today, we are most fortunate to have Marge Battin as our guest, Mrs. Lexington, truly, and thank you for coming and being in this program. Reading your resume, it is clear that you have devoted your whole life, or practically your whole life, to serving society. What inspired you?
Thank you, Mary. I'm delighted to be here. Well, it goes way, way back, I guess, to my childhood and sort of the biblical maxim that from those to whom much is given, much is required. I think my family just have a tradition of it. Dad was I had a grandfather who was a Presbyterian minister. My father was active in the church as superintendent of the Sunday school. My mother, when we moved from Canada when I was 11 to an industrial town in the Midwest, and Mom was active in starting an art museum and the symphony. So, but I remember particularly my grandmother, who lived to be 94, and she was on the board of the old people's home, and it was in wartime, so people weren't using their cars. And Gram would walk in the rain and things to her meetings. Gram was older than anybody in the old people's home, but she felt they were her old people, and she was going to be there and get to the board meetings. So I guess, it was just, did community work. But the other thing is that I was a child of the Depression, and I was very aware of people coming to our back door and asking for meals and things, and we would feed them. And the one story that I'm still looking for, a little girl with potholders, I'd come home from a party and had a party dress on and was coming down the stairs, and we had a maid at the time, and she answered the doorbell. It was a little girl about my age who was about 9 years old. She had a tray of potholders she was selling, and it was after dark. It must have been about 7 or 8. And the maid went in to tell Mom and Dad, who were eating dinner, and she didn't say a child. She said somebody's selling potholders, and they said they just weren't interested there, And I took one look, and I tore into Dad, and I said, "Dad, she's a little girl my age." And Dad said, "Oh my heavens." And he got up, grabbed my hand, and we both, Dad and I, in the dark, went around the neighborhood for about an hour calling little girl, and we never did find her. And so I keep feeling that that's really stuck in my head. So, and then after that, we had a club of little girls who used to meet once a week, and I got interested in helping the fresh air kids. And they were fresh air camps. So,
now, could you describe a fresh air camp?
It was in Canada, and what they did was the inner city children were sent out for 2 weeks into the countryside to a camp that was to introduce them to it and things. And I remember reading about it or hearing about it in the paper. So we decided we wanted to raise money to do our little club that met once a week. And so one of the fathers, bless his heart, helped us write a play. We wrote a play, and our long-suffering friends, both the Davis family and ours, were conned into come watching. And Mr. Davis played all the male parts because they were all little girls in it. And we raised enough money to send kids to the fresh air camp. So anyway, that went way, way back. So then in the wartime, we moved to the States, to Racine, Wisconsin, which was an industrial town. So I worked at a tank factory 2 summers, getting spare parts to the assembly line, and then we also wrapped spare parts and had to put them in boiling hot wax because they were going for light tanks that were being sent to North Africa. So I got a chance and the people in the union were absolutely lovely, and I got to know a whole lot of people I wouldn't have perhaps normally, and saw the problems, and the women whose husbands were in the war and were working and trying to juggle family. So you got a sense of that. So when I went to Wellesley, I decided I wanted to major in economics, and I got interested in labor economics and thought I was going to be a labor organizer. because in fact, when I was in the tank factory, I actually was elected vice president of the plant safety committee. So at 17 years old, this was, or 16, it was even before I was 17. So, you know, and as I said, but then I majored Dick, who was going back to school at MIT, so I ended up working for an investment firm and never got to be a labor organizer. But anyway, it's sort of in my genes, so that then the other thing is, when I got older, one of my jobs, it was an actual paid job. I became director of the Resource Survey Project at the Department of Mental Health. And what there were a lot of services out of there and a lot of people with needs, and they weren't connecting one to another. And we didn't have, there are good information or referral services spottily around Massachusetts, but a lot of people didn't know resources that were available. So I headed a project for the Department of Mental Health, and we talked to local leagues, and we sent them out, got the lists of the agencies in each community, in each area of the state. We did directories for the whole state, and then the leagues would go out and interview them, and we had questionnaires to see what they provided, and then my office put it together, and we did publish directories and things. So again, it was, you know, connecting people to resources. So it just where I fell into things in my life, and I never thought about government, because in Canada, I don't know about municipal government. We thought about the provincial government and about the country's government. And in the Midwest, you know, if your town's relatively well run, volunteers aren't involved. And when we came to Massachusetts, our area was having problems with sewer disposal. They allowed the builders to take off too much of the prime land, and the sedimentation rate, water was not, and the sewage was not percolating down the way it should. We needed a trunk line sewer, and we had to convince town meeting to fund it. I guess it turned it down a couple of years. So a neighbor, John Harvey, came over and talked to Dick and said, how about running for town meeting? And Dick sort of, what's that? We literally...
Is this here in Lexington?
Yeah, in Lexington, yeah. Because coming from the Midwest, we never heard of town meeting, and we were relatively new to Lexington. And so then Dick did run, and we got a trunk line sewer in our area of Lexington. And then Dick was on the appropriation committee, and he kept coming home and telling me things he'd done and stuff. And having been an economics major, I just had my third baby at the time, and I kept asking him questions. And finally he said, why in the heck don't you run? And so the rest is history.
Now, was it 1960 that you first became a town meeting member?
So I was there for 49 years.
49 years. Well, from the position of being a town meeting member, you certainly have become involved and active and been in many, many positions. There's no question about that. Now, all the positions you held, and maybe you could list a few of them, and then perhaps we could talk about what were some of your most difficult times, situations and so forth, because you did such a wonderful job in all these positions. But would you mind telling us about some of the positions that you
well,
held?
let's see. I think I started out first in the Town Meeting Members Association, which is very active and wants an informed town meeting. And we started the Warren information booklets and Warren information meetings, and I was chairman of the Warren Information Committee when we started that. And the Town Meeting Members Association also started studying the various areas of town government that needed improvement, and one of them was the actual process by which it operated. So I was co-chair of the Structure of Government Committee for the Town Meeting Members Association, and on the strength of its report, town meeting itself voted to have an official committee, and Bob Kent was then the moderator, and Bob Kent appointed a committee of 5, and I was chairman of it. And so from that, we wrote the Selectman Town Manager Act, and that was the one that got passed in '69. And then I decided on the basis of that, I got more and more interested in how the government operated and had a fairly good idea. Wanted to make sure the the Manager Act got implemented the way we intended. So I ran for selectman, and I was a selectman for 12 years, and 3 of that I was chairman, which is, we never rotated the chairmanship, but no one ever kept it for more than 3 years. It was just part of our procedures. And I did that for 12 years, and I loved it, but then I thought I'd been there long enough, and so I took a year off, and then I ran for moderator. It was an open seat at the time. Link Cole retired, so I didn't, you know, bump anybody off. But I was the first woman who'd ever done that. So, and then the other thing I did that I was when I was a selectman and Jackie Smith was chairman of the board, I was appointed to the Center Revitalization Committee and chaired that. And we did do quite a large plan for revitalizing the center, hired professional help and had it done formally, and again involving lots of volunteers, and again the League of Women Voters, who's always stood me in good stead. I mean, all the survey throughout the state, the League always came to the fore and was willing to help and provide volunteers. So.
Now I'm going to ask you a question. You don't have to answer it if you want. But thinking of all of these positions that you have held in the town, which ones were the most challenging?
Well, you know, interestingly enough, you'd think either selectman or moderator, and they had a lot of challenging moments, but I think the structure of government committee, because what we were going to do was literally change the way Lexington operated. It was not, it was an administrative change, but there were a lot of independently elected positions, the town treasurer, the comptroller, the town clerk, all were elected positions, the trustees of public trusts. There was no coordination under a single head. Nobody was responsible. I mean, everybody had their own fiefdom, and you didn't tread on their toes. Town meeting was not always getting the information it wanted, and then when town meeting voted something, it often didn't get implemented because the responsibility for implementation was not spelled out. And the selectmen were spending an awful lot of time doing administrative things, and we had no really full-time administrator under whom all the administrative departments were. So we had to go in, and the town had a structure of government committee in 1955 and talked about consolidated administration, and that failed. It didn't go through town meeting. So this was another attempt. And
excuse me, that was in 1955?
The one that failed, yeah. So that, and across the Commonwealth, there are a lot of town manager plans. The whole idea of a paid professional administrator scared a lot of people. They liked the volunteer selectmen. But the time came, we all got so complicated, and you know, lay volunteers couldn't do it. They just couldn't. So this was a big change. It was something that had failed in '55, and we just sort of bit the bullet and decided we would really try it. And it was amazing. There was some resistance from the selectmen in the beginning, but it ended up with at least some of the board approving it. The whole process, we had to go first to town meeting. It had to approve it, and then it had to go to the voters, and they had to approve it. And it was a very good committee because we had people who were like Alan Adams, who was no longer a selectman, a former selectman, Art Bryson, who was a former chairman of the planning board, Lottie Sharfman, who was a former chairman of the League of Women Voters, and then several of them went off in the time we were doing the study, and we had people like Steve Russian and Harriet Relman and Fred Frick who were on it, and Fred had been chairman of the school committee. So there were people who really knew the government and who had credibility, a lot more than I did, because this time I'd never even been an elected official other than a town meeting member. So, but it went through town meeting, luckily. Steve gave the presentation. Steve Russian did a beautiful job. Town meeting voted to submit it to the voters, and then we had to convince the voters. And at that time, no Manager Act in Massachusetts had ever passed the first time it went to the voters. It usually failed, and then it would be reintroduced a few years later. But what we did with the 5 of us, you know, farmed out, and we went to every organization. We just said, give us 10 minutes to explain what we're trying to do or so, rather than have just special meetings.
Right.
And it worked. We were the first town that ever got the Manager Act through, manager act through the first time it went to the voters. So, and that was in 1969, and it was a real challenge. It was fun and exciting, and but you know, you're taking away people's independent fiefdoms, and you're having a town manager to whom people have to report who never had to report to anybody before, and you're having to. We spelled out very carefully what the manager's role was and circumscribed it. So, and he was always responsible to the selectmen, and they could fire him if they had to, or so that we didn't change the structure. Only the administrative really part. But anyway, that was, I think, probably the most.
That's very interesting, Marge. I think you ought to go to the high school and talk to a U.S. history class and talk to them about town government and the role, how important it is. Obviously, you are well respected in Lexington, and you have done so much. And the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has also recognized your expertise, because I read over your resume, you have certainly been involved in many things with the Commonwealth. Would you care to mention a few of the positions that you have held within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts? I mean, we want you to be just Lexington, but we'll share you with Massachusetts.
Well, no, this is the thing, you know, you learn an enormous amount by being involved at the state level, because I've been, and apparently I'm the only one I hadn't thought about until Dick mentioned it, who've been president of both the Massachusetts Selectmen's Association and the Massachusetts Moderators Association. And in fact, I'm the first woman to have ever been president of the Mass Selectmen. And I will never forget the men coming to me, the nominating committee, and said, Marge, we're going to try this. We're going to nominate you. But if you blow it, you're the last one. So I didn't blow it, apparently, because we had almost in rapid succession 6 women be president of the Mass Selectmen.
No,
the men realized that, well, women can, as you know, can do a good job and attention to detail and get things done. And no, so I did that. But as I said, meeting my colleagues across the state was just extraordinary, and how much both selectmen and moderators, the incredible kind of people who are willing for free to give hours. I mean, some of the lawyers bill $500 an hour in their professional life, and they're giving untold hours. But it was the range of people. There'd be local, the western part, there'd be farmers, and there'd be local businessmen, and there'd be academics, and there'd be housewives, and just everybody. But, you know, to a person, they all cared. And they really, even if their views of what the answers to problems were different, or even how they identified the problems, they all cared. So I think going outside of Lexington was important, because I brought it back an awful lot that we could do here locally.
You also gave a lot.
Well, yeah,
they shared.
This is it, and
with the Commonwealth.
And that was one of the things we tried to do. Both the selectmen and the moderators, when I was president, is have workshops for new moderators and for new selectmen to learn how to do it. And then because the other thing is, when I was the president of the selectmen, we did form the Mass Municipal Association, which was all the mayors and the selectmen and the aldermen and both cities and towns. Before we had a Mass League of Cities and Towns, it was rather weak. The other thing is, I hate this not being a feminist, but there were not an awful lot of women in elected officials. Right. So we did form, I was one of the founding members and the first chairman of the Women Elected Municipal Officials of Massachusetts. WEMO, we called ourselves. And we wanted to help more women get in positions of authority. The Mass League of Cities and Towns had never had anybody on the nominating committee, a woman, and they'd never nominated a president. And the first woman president was of the Mass League of Cities, Mass Municipal Association, was Nancy Annie from Amherst. So we did get that. And one thing we did is we would take brown bag lunches to each other's towns once a month, and towns would show something they'd done in terms of waste management or something. I remember Mary Milne showing our conversion of our schools into low and moderate income housing and things. That was one of the things people get. So that it was, and WEMO still existed. The other thing I did, because I was an officer of the Mass Selectmen's, on the local government advisory committee, Governor Dukakis and then Governor King had met with the officers of the mayors, the selectmen, and we met once a month and talk about local issues, because it's amazing how the state officials are insulated from the problems. They think we're another group that comes with its hand out wanting things from them. They don't look at us as another partner, because well, we kept pointing out to them, all the services they mandate and everything, it all gets played out on the local level. In fact, that's what I like about it. That's where you see the results of what you vote in local elections or in state or in national. It all gets played out, and the results, good or bad, are seen here. And we have to deal with the consequences of all the other levels of government's decisions.
Right.
And we wanted them to see us as a partner, not just another group who was coming to them for a handout. And it was really fun. The governors, both Dukakis and King, listened to us. And so it was, I guess that's it. Oh, I chaired the tax policy committee of the Mass Municipal Association because I'd been an economics major, and we filed the first comprehensive tax reform in years, and one of what was to dedicate a certain amount of state aid, that they would always have to give us a certain percentage, which fell by the wayside, and they're not giving us a certain percentage. Good times or bad, but we tried anyway. So
It's wonderful. I mean, it's interesting to just see how the politics function and the role that individual communities have too in influencing, like you influenced mass state policies and so forth.
yeah, they really listened to us.
They
because we
listened
did.
to you.
Yeah. And that was
But-
the one thing the women felt, they had to be even better informed than the men. And I've never, honestly, in my public life, felt there are people who didn't like me and who didn't agree with me, but it was never because I was a woman. But some of the women really had trouble in towns, and the men would caucus and not include them and put them down and this sort of thing. And so we talk about how you dealt with these issues. And more and more women. I mean, there are boards of selectmen now in Massachusetts in which the majority will be women, and that was unheard of. And we're sort of universally respected. And as I said, I think after I left being president of the Mass Selectmen, there were at least 6 women in the next 10 years that were president. So, and they just opened the doors.
You're an inspiration.
No, I wasn't an inspiration. It's
Yes,
just
you are.
that they saw that, you know, we could do it, and we were
Yes.
willing to do it. And I think the women, again, were extraordinary. They worked hard, and they really knew their facts and issues, and they were team players. And the men will forgive me who are watching this. Women are much more likely to ask for help than men are. And that's why WeMo was successful, because we say, hey, I can't handle this, how do you do it? So that I think that's something we brought to the table.
Great.
Anyway.
Well, moving on to other areas, Marge, you have certainly been involved in many aspects of Lexington. I mean, your affiliations with the church, the library, and so forth. Would you like to describe some of the, what you call, what you have labeled as social services for the community? I mean, you've been in politics and you have, I don't know how you do it all, but anyway.
Well, I see, yeah, remember, I didn't do it all at once. You know, it's over 50 years, and you could do a lot in 50 years.
Would you describe some of the social services that you have provided for this community too, for the community of Lexington?
Okay, I'm trying to think. You said the church, I go to Hancock Church, and I was on the standing committee and the library committee and taught Sunday school. I was one of the first of the Metco host parents, one of the original ones when the kids came with that idea. And we had a very good relationship with our Metco boy. Again, when our kids were teenagers and we were having trouble with kids needing counseling and things, I was one of the incorporators and a director on the board of directors of Replace, which was the youth counseling service, remember?
Yes.
And kind of went very well, and Jean Miley was chairman of it. Mary Miley's daughter, Mary, was later a selectman, and Jean was a love and did a beautiful job. And that was started really by Peter Clark, who was the son of Henry Clark, who was a minister at Hancock Church. And that was very successful. In fact, there were times. It really was. There were times we literally had to, some of the children left their homes, and they weren't actually runaways, but the feeling was, and we always had their parents' agreement, that they move in with somebody else for, you know, a few nights. And so we had homes that were willing to do that. Dick and I did it a few times too, and this was when our kids were teenagers. There was the Lexington Interfaith Corporation that was sponsored low and moderate income housing, and that was before we had LexHab, which we set up. And I was a director of the Mass Association for Mental Health, just because I was probably director of their resource survey. I've always loved libraries, and by virtue of being selectman, I was a trustee of the library. But then when it came to the fundraising, why, they asked me to serve as vice president of the Cary Library, the foundation, and we headed the building fund, and now I'm on the planned gift committee of the library. And this is, now the building's done, we have to worry about acquisitions. People don't realize that it isn't all coming from tax dollars, that we literally do have to go out and raise money so that for adult books and things. So again, I was very interested in, having done these directories, I became chairman of the United Way of Massachusetts Information and Referral Committee. And and I was on the board of directors of Cary, which was Commuter Assisted Information and Referral network, because the problem was you could have all the, and we did, as I said, in every area of Massachusetts, develop directories, but you had to keep them up to date. And then you had to, they wanted to put them on computers, so when the services of a particular agency changed, you could put it in, and whether they had vacancies and could take people and things. So I was on that board of directors too. So everything sort of fit in together with what I was doing. It's not as if I went off and, well, youth counseling perhaps was outside the other things I was doing.
I would like you to mention, you have in your resume here a segment entitled Awards.
Oh.
And you have, now this I think is Lifetime Achievement Award.
From the Chamber of Commerce.
From the Lexington Chamber of Commerce. What was that? How did they recognize you?
Well, the trouble was, you'll have to ask Norm Cohen how they recognized me, because they scheduled a meeting in which I was to get it. It was the day I was having surgery at Mass General.
All right, okay, so.
So Norm went, they had a lovely dinner, they had a picture of me, which Norm had up in an easel, and they said some very nice things, I've seen that, and they thought it was appropriate because I followed Link Cole as moderator, and Link was always known for his cowboy hat, that I get a cowboy hat. So we have a picture of Norm wearing my hat with my picture beside it, and the chairman of the chamber. But other than that,
They did read to you your award, I mean, what they had to say.
Yes,
and so forth.
and the people gave speeches, and they videoed it, so I did get a chance to see what. But if I hadn't, they tried to change the date, but they told everybody about it. And since I had no idea I was going to get an award, I'd scheduled surgery. So anyway.
And another award that you have listed that you received, Unsung Heroine Award from the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women. You received that one. What?
Well, that was, apparently it's something that Shirley Stoltz, when you talk to her, has had it, and Jerry Frick has had it, and
really?
Kay Tiffany. The thing is, as I've talked to Jay Kaufman afterwards, I said, I feel sort of a phony getting it because I'm hardly unsung. I mean, the things I've done just because they're official are in the paper and things. And Jay Kaufman agreed. He said, whatever else you are, Marge, you're not unsung. So, but it's given, they ask each of the communities in Massachusetts every year to nominate someone who's given of their time in areas in the community. And a lot of them are, I mean, remarkable women who are not acknowledged because they're not a public official. That's how you usually get acknowledged in the paper. And do all sorts of extraordinary things in education and in helping people in need. And I was so impressed listening. You all go to the State House. They have a booklet in which they give people's accomplishment. And then they read off every name and give 3 or 4 sentences. And there's some extraordinary women out there doing remarkable things. And as I said, the people who've gotten it in Lexington, like Kay, Jerry Frick, Shirley Stoltz, are very remarkable women, so well deserving it.
Great.
But I'm not unsung, so.
You know, talking about town meeting and so forth and the importance of town meeting, were you involved when I was teaching, the juniors, the U.S. history students, they would be juniors in high school, would study the town warrant, and then they would go down to the town hall one day and they would have a mock town meeting?
No, the League did that.
The League did that,
yes.
I see. I think that was a wonderful...
Yeah, they should do that more, I think, that's it. And I think, I don't know whether the Boy Scout, I remember Hank Mance being involved in it one time, and other groups have done that. I've gone into the high school and explained the prospect, and there was a teacher for a day. And you went in, Dick, my husband, who's a mathematician, went in all day, and we both went home and said they could never pay the teachers enough money. At the end of 5 hours or 5 classes or whatever, Dick and I just lived home, both went nap for 2 hours. It was extraordinary, you know,
Yes.
you realize what people do, and it's fine like talking to you now, but if I had to do this 5 more times today, I don't know what anybody got out of us at the end of the day.
I really thought that program was very worthwhile, and it made the students aware of local politics and how the community functions
It was
and
interesting,
so forth.
and how different classes could be. One class would be very engaged if I looked out and I thought, at least 5 of their fathers or mothers are in town meeting or something, as to whether they just not been interested. But you know, town meeting is so unique to this part of the country. As I said, coming from the Midwest and having sewer problems, not knowing what one did to do them, and when John suggested Dick run for town meeting, because we'd only been in town, I think, about a year, knew nothing about New England town meeting, so it was very fortuitous. We had backed up sewage in our basement. It has started it all.
Well, Marge, I thank you so much for participating in this Lexington Remembers program. And you are a jewel. You are Mrs. Lexington. There's no question about
Thank
that.
you.
So thank you very much. Do you have anything you'd like to say in conclusion to this?
Oh, well, no.
You have a wonderful family. You've lived here in Lexington now how many years?
Let's see, our son's going to be 58, and we,
Oh, that
57
can't be.
years. It'll be 57 years in March when
That can't
we
be.
moved.
They,
Yeah.
they don't get that old.
I know. We moved in when Tommy was a year old, and Tommy loved your father, so did Jeff. So, I'm not your father, husband, but I do it up there. Don, yes, yeah, they love
Well,
Don.
thank you very much, Marge, and we appreciate this.
Well, it was fun,
So,
so.
you will have to watch yourself on cable.
No, I can't. I'll tell Dick, he can look at it. I can't stand looking at me. I keep thinking, what on it I think?